Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that you would think I would have read in my childhood, but for one reason or another, I did not. It is a book about talking farm animals, although probably not the one you're thinking of. I am referring to Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, which was published in 1952. For those who don't know, E.B. White was an author who lived between the late 1800s and the late 1900s. He was primarily known for writing children's literature, Charlotte's Web, which I'm talking about today, but also Stuart Little, which I have not read, but I do intend on reading in the near future, and The Trumpet of the Swan, which I've heard things about. I think Lucas might have talked about it on his channel or at the Bits of Lit. I know he's talked about Charlotte's Web before, and he even gave it some praise. So that was something to look forward to as I read this. E.B. White, of course, wrote a lot of children's literature. What's interesting is that he wasn't as well known as maybe some other children's authors, as some of his friends noted that he could write, or he could walk through a crowded hotel lobby and no one would know that he was E.B. White, probably because he didn't really seek that much notoriety for himself. He was much more content with writing, which is noble, or something like that. It's always nice when authors don't try to be bigger than their work, they just write and enjoy what they're writing, or something like that. But yeah, I was very much looking forward to reading this, and it was indeed pretty high quality. You will see me praising it and recommending it throughout this video. So without further ado, let's talk about Charlotte's Web. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Charlotte's Web focuses on Wilbur. He is a pig, born as the runt of the litter in a farmer's farm, and the farmer wants to get rid of him, but the farmer's daughter, Fern, argues that he is worth saving, and the farmer says it's your responsibility now. And so Fern raises Wilbur for a little bit, and becomes quite attached to him. At the same time, the farmer, after about a month or so, decides to sell Wilbur to the Zuckerman farm, his brother, as he doesn't want anything to do with the pig. And presumably, as some of the farm animals note and the characters hint, Wilbur will be eventually eaten, because that's just what happens to pigs. But Wilbur doesn't initially know this. He does begin to feel some loneliness on Zuckerman's farm. Fern visits, but it's not as frequent as it was when she was raising him. And he laments that the other farm animals don't really want anything to do with him. But fortunately, he does make friends with a spider in one of the barns named Charlotte. Charlotte is very worldly. She even knows Latin despite being a spider, which I think is a little bit funny. But she's willing to be friends and is willing to stand up for Wilbur whenever necessary, to the various farm animals that believe they're better than Wilbur. But Wilbur hears about the fact that he's going to be killed maybe during the winter, and he cries about it, whines about it. He's very worried about it, as one would be. And he asks Charlotte if she can do something about it, and she figures that she might be able to help in some sort of way. And what she ends up doing is she writes "some pig" in her web, along with the words "terrific" and "radiant" at later intervals, in order to draw attention to Wilbur and note how great he is. Zuckerman and the entire community come and see the writing in the web, and they believe it to be a miracle, and no one questions that it might have been Zuckerman himself. But Charlotte seems to have saved Wilbur's life initially, although it's a bit uncertain whether or not this will prolong his life way down the road. And at a certain point, Charlotte begins feeling weak. She realizes that her time is coming to an end, but she wants to lay eggs and prolong, or not prolong, but like complete the cycle of life at that point. She does this when Wilbur and the Zuckermans go to the state fair, and Charlotte decides at that point that she's got to help Wilbur one final time to seal his good fate so that he's not killed. And at the state fair, she writes another thing called Humble, which surprises and wows people. And although Zuckerman doesn't win any major prizes for the pig, he does gain a lot of notoriety, and I think he wins a little bit of money as well. And everything is marvelous. Wilbur leaves, but Charlotte stays behind and dies at the fair of old age, which is a very sad moment in the story. And then as the story comes to a close, those eggs hatch and a lot of the spiders leave, which saddens Wilbur. But 3 spiders stay behind and make great friends with Wilbur. And again, as the story comes to a close, Wilbur grows old, befriending the granddaughters of Charlotte as well as the great-granddaughters until he presumably dies himself. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about in this story. Again, this is children's literature, largely aimed at young adults, or even middle grade literature. But again, it's, as I always say, it's important to talk about this type of literature because what messages are we sending to children? What are like middle grade authors really saying in their literature? Does it merit people even paying attention to what they're writing? And with E.B. White, the answer is yes. Like, we should absolutely be paying attention to what he's writing because it is high quality, and he does what I feel like a lot of young adult fiction writers do, or he does what a lot of young adult writers fail to do, and that is treat children as though they are human beings and worth a respect. I know with a lot of young adult writers, especially Meg Cabot, as I talk about a lot in this channel, it doesn't feel like she respects young adults, and it's just like you're selling crap to these people that will so often absorb that type of stuff, and you're really like sacrificing your own like name in the future because no one's going to remember you or something like that. But that's a very long sort of spiel right there. But some of the ideas that E.B. White is talking about here include the idea of friendship. Charlotte and Wilbur grow to be great friends in this story. It's built out of loneliness, with Wilbur kind of being lonely, not really having anyone, being the runt of the litter, and being the only pig on the Zuckerman farm, and the other animals turning their noses up at him for some bizarre reason. Maybe they know that he's meant to be eaten, where they're not meant to be eaten. It's a bit unclear, but they're very rude to him. And Charlotte is willing to be his friend, possibly because she can't stand that injustice, but also because she's not as snobby as the other animals on the farm. I do think there is some loneliness to Charlotte, where she is a spider. She's seen as a blood-sucking creature of some sort, catching flies in the web and eating them. Possibly one of the only meat-eating animals on the farm besides the human, so kind of different. And so Wilbur and Charlotte are both different. They forge an unlikely friendship because, again, one is an insect, the other is a pig, but the friendship is strong there. And what E.B. White is saying is that friendship entails being there for somebody when they need you, whether it be when someone needs company or when someone's in a very low state, just being there, listening to them, trying to help them in any way you can. And again, that's another major part of it, is helping any way you can. Like, Charlotte realizes that she can help Wilbur by writing like these fantastic words into her web, and that's all she really needs to do is to wow the humans, because they she says they're pretty gullible and they'll believe anything as long as it appears to be miraculous or something like that. There's an interesting quote from this that I would like to read to you. "Why did you do all this for me?" he asked. "I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you." "You have been my friend," replied Charlotte. "That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what's a life anyway? We're born, we live a little bit, we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess with all this trapping and eating flies," which is a fantastic quote. It really touched my heart when I read it, because it's such a sincere moment between Wilbur and Charlotte. And like Wilbur asking, I kind of haven't done anything for you, and Charlotte saying, you don't really have to do anything for friends. That's kind of what friendship is. It's just being friendly to someone by default. And it's a very beautiful moment between two characters. But I will say Wilbur kind of doesn't give much in this friendship. I know friendship is unconditional, but Wilbur is still very needy, and he demands a lot of Charlotte. He's essentially saying, "Save my life, Charlotte. You have to do something." And it's like, what? Charlotte's a spider. She can't affect that much change, although she does in the end. It's still like he expects a lot out of Charlotte, and he doesn't really seem to give her much else in this story. That's like one of the few faults that I've always had with the Charlotte's Web story, because I've watched the movie before. I haven't read, even though I haven't read the book. So it just seems like Wilbur is asking for a lot and not really giving much love back in return. E.B. White also seems to be talking about nature, or how things are. He notes that pigs are normally eaten. That's the cycle. You raise up a pig on a farm, and that pig is eaten. Even if Wilbur doesn't like it, that's how nature goes. He also he also shows through Charlotte, Charlotte argues that she naturally eats flies. Her mother before her did it, and her mother before her did that as well. And Charlotte can't really change who she is. She's not like a human who can be vegetarian. She's just simply a spider who has to eat flies because that is a part of her diet. And she also argues that you can't really change that nature, that Wilbur getting upset about her eating flies, that's not going to change that she needs to eat flies to live. Although Charlotte does do a lot of effort in changing nature, sort of getting the Zuckermans to see Wilbur as something more than should be eaten. So kind of arguing for and against there. But I really like how E.B. White is arguing that death is a part of life, that you can't avoid it, it's always going to happen. Even though Charlotte saved Wilbur now, years down the road, he's still going to die. And even though it's a very sad moment, Charlotte dies in this story because that's the life cycle. I'm sure E.B. White could have made it a much more happier ending, but this feels more real, and it kind of hurts, but it kind of shows that even after our friends die, we can still carry on our love for them and the other things that are kind of related to them. In this case, Wilbur's continued love for Charlotte's descendants. And one thing I didn't expect to find in Charlotte's Web, of all things, is pastoral writing. Pastoral writing so commonly focuses on farm life, the idyllic rural setting, sort of carefree lifestyle on the farmland. And you see that exactly here with talk of farmers and the way that E.B. White describes the scenery around the farm. Very beautiful, very relaxing. And the characters of focus, which is a pig on a farm and a spider on a farm. And ultimately, you really get a feel for how much E.B. White seems to love nature in this story, as he just marvels at everything around him. One of the characters, I think it's the preacher, when he's talking about the spiderweb, notes how like human beings can be taught to knit and sew and whatnot, but who teaches a spider how to weave a web? And that kind of like amazed me, because like Evie White's just like straight up saying like, there's a lot of surprising things around us that we take for granted in nature, and I think that's just really beautiful writing right there. I also think it's interesting how like Fern's imagination comes into play in this story, where you see a lot of illustrations of Fern like watching the animals. She's around the animals, and you could argue that this is all taking place in her head, that the animals aren't really talking, or that like she's imagining scenarios where they're having conversations just by watching the animals and how they're interacting, which is fine. I do think that's kind of a lazy way to write, because it's not nearly as imaginative as having like these animals actually talking. But I do think that Evie White kind of lays the groundwork there, as this could be just the regular part of a child's imagination taking off and like sort of seeing the world as it might not actually be, but in a way that's slightly more magical. And then another thing I want to note is the hate that Templeton receives in the story. Templeton the rat, like it seems like Evie White has a grudge against somebody, and he turned that grudge into Templeton the rat. Like there is no redeeming quality possibly about Templeton the rat, and it really seems like this is like some sort of racist caricature at times, although I know it's not. That's just me making a joke, but it does seem like there was somebody in Evie White's life that he absolutely hated, and so he wrote him as the rat. And all the, like, I don't think anyone says anything really good about Templeton throughout the entire story, which is just funny. Like, it doesn't weigh anything on the story. It's just an interesting observation to make here. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. The first story by E.B. White that I've read, and I have to say it's pretty high quality. I definitely recommend it to you out there. Not only if you're, a high schooler, child, teenager, whatever, looking for something good to get into, I definitely recommend that. But also if you're an adult, and you haven't read it yet, like me, this might be a very interesting story worth exploring and recapturing some of the magic that might have been lost once you exited childhood or something like that. I know that's how it was for me, and it made me feel warm, and there were sad moments, but it was ultimately joyful. So yeah, I'm going to recommend it to you out there. If you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about this wonderful book. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book or this author if they do not already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and spidery travels. Farewell.